Colby Covington, obviously coming off the great win over Tyron Woodley. He was most recently in the news, not for MMA reasons per se, but because he was actually at the last debate between President Trump and then former Vice President Joe Biden. You can actually hear him when the debate is over sort of scream, I think, what was it, best president ever, or some kind of plaudit, but it was clearly him, and you can actually see him in the audience. Since then, he put out a message, BC, on social media saying he does not have COVID. We don't know if that's actually true, but let's say for the sake of argument that it is. And that, he's sort of celebrating the healthy return that, I don't know how healthy it actually is, but the return to the Oval Office of President Trump. And, all the people who have been speaking ill of him will get theirs in the end. But it raises an interesting question, BC. It's one that I've been asked, and I don't think I've given a very good answer to, so I'd like to do it here today. The election for... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I said, please do, Luke.
Yeah.
Okay?
The election for president is less than a month away, for folks who may not realize that. It's less than a month. This is not something I wish to have as a overtly political discussion. In fact, I don't think that it will be, but it does have some tie-ins because, BC, you watch pro wrestling, I don't. Maybe you can think of an example that will help us better understand this. Whether you like Trump or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that Colby Covington has tied his identity to a political actor. And a political actor, at least in theory, will have their fortunes change day to day, month to month, year to year, but substantially over the course of elections. And there are two different scenarios I guess I'd like to imagine. One in which Trump loses the election. We'll start with that one first. And then one where he wins. Because I actually do think that's a separate and important part of the conversation as well. But first, let's go to the other one. BC, have you ever seen somebody tie their fortunes and not really their fortunes really, their identity to some outside actor, some outside figure that has really uncertain futures? Because that's really what this is all about. Is there anything in pro wrestling that reminds you of what we're seeing here?
I mean, maybe, ahead of WrestleMania 7 when Sergeant Slaughter, that dirtbag turncoat, and joined the Iranian military, Luke, for the big showdown with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 7, all right? He was really playing up the Gulf War, right, during that point. But no, this is real life. And by the way, I like you referring to politicians as actors. That's my territory, Luke, okay? Both sides are fake. They're selling you up the river here, Luke, to try to believe that this stuff is real. No, there is no one person who has ever tied his boat to something, and his shtick and his personification of what makes him famous more right now than Colby and Donald Trump. So, Luke, how important is November 3rd to the future of Colby's career from a marketing standpoint? Is it win or go home?
Here's the thing I just find so interesting. Colby started out as the guy who was spoiling Star Wars and Spider-Man or whatever it was. I think there was another one he spoiled as well. And I actually found that more hilarious because if you looked at his mentions, it was just everybody in MMA, it didn't matter the political affiliation, super bitter at him. I found that to be very funny, but he morphed that into basically being the Trump world mascot in MMA. He wears the hat all the time. He's reading the book at the press conferences. Anytime he does an interview, he's wearing some kind of Trump shirt. There's the Trump letter over his shoulder, right? It's at all times Trump symbolism in your face. Again, it's not about a good or bad. It's just it is what it is. But he got in on it at basically what could be the high watermark of it. I mean, right now Trump is in fact president. I don't know if he'll win on November 3rd, but right now that is the most powerful office in the land. That is the apex leader of the free world, for better or for worse. And so to have an association with that, dude, it has a lot of dividends. You get to go to the Oval Office. He's on ESPN, and the President of the United States is calling him on the phone, and he gets to pick it up and answer on live television. Dude, that is powerful. That is very, very powerful. And I can understand why you might want those associations. That's not to say he doesn't have actual political agreement with Trump, but that power and that status, it is that imprimatur of the presidential seal on everything that he does. And then to an extent, depending on what you want to believe in, the success of the larger Trump family. Well, that's got to be intoxicating for somebody to have that kind of arm, so to speak, put around you. But the problem is it's incredibly fleeting. Now, we will get to a scenario, as I mentioned, where he wins. But here's the thing, BC. If he loses, and if there is a peaceful transference of power, which at this point, I guess we'll have to see exactly what happens. Let's assume that it does. You have to ask yourself what happens to the Trump brand afterwards. And I don't want to get nakedly political here, but you have to ask some of these questions, which is to say, even today, BC, you had a federal court rule that essentially a New York prosecutor can take a look at Trump's taxes. There was a report and by the way, Cy Vance is looking at them, and so is Tish James and many other prosecutors at various levels of the government in New York looking after his finances to see if there's any actually illegal activity. More to that point, if you look at the licensing agreements that he made by virtue of the New York Times reports, we're talking upwards of $400 million he was able to make off the Trump name. Can you still do that if you're a one-term president? So it gets to a point where after he becomes, if he doesn't get reelected, you have to ask yourself, to what extent do Trump's misfortunes, should they happen, does that affect Colby's identity? Because he's not a right-leaning fighter, BC. He is the Trump mascot. And so tying your fortunes to that guy, if he A, loses an election, and then B, faces any kind of criminal prosecution or some kind of status decline, I think that could have profound impacts on how he's viewed.
100%. So, let's be honest here. The origin of this is, and Colby tells his own sort of creation story, and you can argue if it's completely true, but that after a boring win in which he wrestled early in his UFC run, that UFC matchmaker said we're not going to sign you to a new contract, win or lose entering your last fight, and that was when it all got into his head. I need something different. And look, I talk 2-3 years ago even to people close to ATT, and they've said straight up behind the scenes that it's a Dan Lambert creation. Dan Lambert's the wrestling superfan. He's the guy with the room in his house, the ATT founder, with all the legendary wrestling belts that he's collected. He actually had a pretty good run on Impact Wrestling a couple years back as a heel when they had that MMA invasion for Bobby Lashley, which Colby and Gleason Tebow and others were actually a part of. But Colby, he rode that pretty damn well, and he got himself into a title fight with Usman. But I thought that was going to be the turning point, Luke, because do you remember he did that interview ahead of time with the Republican female? Who am I thinking of?
The African-American lady?
Yes.
Candace Owens.
And he seemed in that moment to do the, and Chael got on him for it, a lot of other people did, to do the cardinal sin in pro wrestling shtick, which is, break kayfabe and basically admit this is an act and I did this to save myself. And suddenly Colby's changing his story from lead agitator, trash-talking troll to almost like, underdog hero. I thought he was going to stay in that direction. He didn't talk hella trash with Usman leading into that build. We didn't see them fight in the buffet line like they almost did before that fight happened, Luke. It was almost a boring build and then obviously a great, exciting fight. But he's doubled down since then. And maybe it was smart to double down because we're entering not only an election season, but the all-time, craziest one in terms of people being this passionate and, Puff Daddy, vote or die, brother, and all that wildness, Luke. I mean, good God, the NBA Finals have vote on the back of the uniforms. I mean, it's a time like no other, Luke. But I do think it's all or nothing here. I'm not going to compare Donald Trump and Joe Exotic exactly, but remember when Tiger King came out? It was freaking the best thing ever for 2 weeks. I even bought 2 t-shirts, Luke. You ever try to wear a Tiger King t-shirt 6 months later? It just feels weird, right? Yeah. It's over. The joke's over, right? We lived it. It's good. You can't do the red hat anymore if Trump loses here. That doesn't mean that Colby still can't be a popular fighter. That doesn't mean he can't be a contending title fighter. But there is now a next level sort of marketing star asterisk attached to him. I don't care if you love it or not. When the president can call you on live TV, when you can have him tweeting out, good luck to Colby Covington, that matters. That's a giant ordeal. It also kind of matters for the UFC in terms of how they market and use him, knowing that he's, got that brand on him. If that's gone, Luke, it's going to have to be more about Colby the fighter and the real person on the inside if Biden wins this election. I don't know if he could keep that up. Does he give up the shtick at that point? Does he stop trying to be the agitator? Or where else could he go?
here's the thing that's interesting to me. It's like, let's talk about some other people who are very pro-Trump. Dana White, right? Dana White, I mean, speaking quite literally on his behalf at not the first, but even the second Republican National Convention. But if I had to ask you, forget about his Trump support, who is Dana White? You could probably give me a pretty good answer. UFC president, longtime fight promoter, blah, 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 blah. Jorge Masvidal. Forget about his Trump support for just a second. And unfortunately for him, the president got COVID, so they couldn't do that bus tour, which would have, I think, enmeshed him to a degree with the Trump brand as well. But you could still say Street Jesus, the sort of the Cuban. Well, actually, that's Romero, the Cuban muscle crisis. But he still has some kind of identity. Absent that, for Colby, the whole thing for him is, again, this is not a referendum on Trump's identity per se. It's just a question of who are you without it. Now, BC, here's the part I'm trying to think of. Can you pivot out of this in a way that fans might find authentic? I know in pro wrestling, it's all of a sudden like some guy goes from being a villain all his life to all of a sudden, boom, overnight, now he's the greatest, or quite the opposite. You could be, good and in an instant, storylines change and you're bad. Can you do that in MMA? I'm not saying it's good or bad, just from X to Y, from black to white to white to black.
Well, look, let's present it like it is. It was a heel turn when he became this gimmick, right? I mean,
but it's not. It's a heel turn in the sense that he was polarizing, but it's very different than the heel turn he made when he was sending out the spoilers, because he got a whole side of people to then support him. He got this whole part of America, quite frankly, that pays attention to it anyway, that said, you know what, I identify with that guy. So it was and it wasn't.
Well, look, for pro wrestling terms, it was a heel turn. He was a kind of a nobody. He started to get people to hate him and want to hate him, and that's how he got popular through that. It also helps that he's a really good fighter and started climbing the ranks there. In pro wrestling terms, if he's going to try to do a face turn after this election, in pro wrestling, you do it by go rescuing the hero. So I don't know if there's any scenario in real MMA where that's possible, where he comes running in the cage to rescue somebody. I just find it really interesting in this regard with the whole idea of this heel turn, because it's annoying. It's over the top. It's ridiculous. He's ridden it really far. Like, if I'm grading this heel turn, it's wildly successful. He's got the president calling him. He showed up at the damn debate, as you mentioned, could be heard on camera yelling. And the fact that he makes you rub your fingers down a chalkboard feeling, whether you're pro or against, just because of how corny at times his shtick can be, the fact that it elicits those emotions out of you in pro wrestling terms means that it works, means that he's winning. I don't actually think there's a real life pivot here, Luke. I don't think there's a way to keep that level of celebrity for him and be able to do that, whether it's attempt to turn good guy or anything here, unless there's some. Is there a villain in UFC that people hate so badly that they'd love to see Colby call out and go after? I don't think so.
Not yet. I want to say this too. I mean, MMA media has been very much in denial about how much Colby has ridden this to a successful conclusion or level. Now, has he become Brock Lesnar in terms of pay-per-view sales? No. Is he the ratings juggernaut that, I don't know, some other fighter might be when you put him on television? I'm not suggesting that. But what he did was he not only asked a certain part of the world, or I should say America, to identify with him, but he asked a portion of America that feels like sometimes the world is a little bit against them, and he represented them proudly and without any equivocation, quite blatantly. And it's a world that is both inside MMA, but also very far outside of MMA. And if you're out there at the debates and the president's calling you on national television and you're a very good fighter and you can use that to, he's getting on shows that most fighters don't get on, dude, it quite obviously worked. And I don't know why media has had trouble saying that up until now. They find every sort of little excuse. Oh, the Lawler fight didn't do good ratings. Dude, the Lawler fight was in 3 p.m. in the middle of the afternoon. And again, I'm not suggesting it has resulted in popularity as I want to put down money to see that guy or to see that guy get knocked out, which maybe is the ultimate litmus test. But in terms of like how visible he was before to how visible he is now, it's a dramatic upgrade. It's a huge upgrade. And there's just no getting around it. So
maybe the only face turn, Luke, is to go out there and start supporting fighter pay and coming back at Dana. Maybe if he turns on Dana, that's the ultimate sort of pro wrestling window of how he turns it back good. But keep going where you were going.
Well, I was just going to say, if you think about other people that MMA fans have hated as fighters, like a Josh Koscheck, he sort of morphed at the end there to something of an elder statesman. Even Michael Bisping for a time was a little bit of a heel, and then all of a sudden turned into an elder statesman to the point where Bisping was even like, I don't even know how the fuck it happened. People just started liking me all of a sudden. I don't know that I foresee that for Colby, because independent of the MAGA shtick, like separate from that, he's doing stuff like, Khabib is engages in all kinds of unspeakable acts with animals, or, making fun of Dustin Poirier with sort of gross verbiage, and he's a very well-liked fighter. Maybe he can just keep that up? Is that a thing he can do, just being shitty to everybody?
Yeah, shitty person works if you just want to stay a sort of, generic heel. I want to ask you, though, all right, short of saving his job, and maybe it did save his job. Where would he be today, though, if he hadn't fully embraced the political side of it? Because there was a time where it wasn't so much about politics, and it was more about, these Brazilians are filthy.
He was Dennis the Menace. That's who he was.
Yeah.
He was Dennis the Menace.
Where would he be right now? Would he have gotten all the opportunity he had up to this point? As much as we say this was a great victory for him, he has succeeded in making this gimmick work and getting fairly popular out of it. Would his ability have gotten here anyway?
His ability would have gotten him pretty far. How far, it's hard to say. When Verdun was chucking boomerangs at him, that had a pretty interesting effect too, right? It wasn't like people weren't paying attention. But it changed, right? Because when he started becoming out as like super pro MAGA, you had a lot of other fighters been like, you know what? I thought I hated Colby. I'm pretty pro MAGA too. And so a lot of that kind of tension went away. I tend to think he still would have gotten pretty far, but I don't think that the level of attention that he got would be the same. And by the way, not all the attention is good. Calling Brazilians filthy animals, making the smoke signal argument or claim against, Usman. These are, just call them what they are. It's racist as shit. But at the same time, there's just a level of visibility that was afforded to him because there were people shining spotlights on him due to his advocacy that ordinarily would not have. But by hook or by crook, he was going to find a way, to be clear. Now, it leads me to the second...
It's interesting. If Trump wins the election, we assume him to sort of ride out over the next 4 years of Colby's career, this idea that he's, this red hat wearing guy. He may also become a babyface through that. They're all, like you said, there is a large amount of people. I mean, if a large amount of people vote this man in as president again, Luke, there's an idea there that maybe Colby turns babyface through that. What do you like about this idea, though? If Trump loses the election, and let's say Colby is unsuccessful in winning the welterweight title outright, do you think there's a secondary run in his career as a Chael Sonnen-esque type troll, is what you're saying, just kind of being shitty and going after people? I mean, look, Sonnen got his popularity by going after the beloved Anderson Silva and sort of, pressing the right buttons and doing that. Who's his Anderson Silva? Can he do that to Conor? If we're looking at this as wrestling, where you're like, okay, I got this aging superstar who's the perfect villain, I got to try to match him up with this guy, I can make money here, I got to match him up with here. Do you think it's going after Conor, or going after the Diaz brothers, or going after a fighter that more people love than hate, and trying to purposely be the Chael Sonnen bad guy in those scenarios?
Usman seems to be his muse one way or the other. I don't think there's any kind of analogous thing. Chael also, was never overtly political and still had this ability to capture an audience. I don't know. Again, there's a debate about to what extent Colby has the same kind of powers. I just don't think it would work out the same way. He doesn't have quite the same overt pulling the pro wrestling strings ability.
I don't think he has the wit. He doesn't have the wit of a Chael Sonnen, right?
And it's not even exactly humorous. It's only humorous for how insulting it is. And even then, he's dialed even some of that back. Like, remember when people would miss weight, even when he was doing the MAGA shtick? He would still go after them. He doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't really go after... He has much bigger... I mean, when he went after LeBron James, they were comparing, not LeBron James and Colby per se, but they were sort of talking about this juxtaposition on First Take. He's realized you got to have huge targets So he's not even really focused on MMA targets for the most part. It's more about the larger culture wars, and he sees himself as sort of an avatar for one of the soldiers. All right, but it leads me to a question now about the other side of the coin, BC. What happens if Trump wins? And I want to say it in the same way we talked about with Biden, where it's a reasonably normal election with reasonably normal results, and Trump wins outright in a way that is reasonably without controversy, right? Let's imagine that, because there could be a million different spaces in between, but let's imagine that. That has to be an unbelievable boost for him, because you got 4 more years, 32 years of age. He'd be 36 by the time that the president would be done. You would have built this goodwill where now, I mean, you know this as well as I do, being a one-term president can be devastating for your historical record. Getting 2 doesn't absolve you from all of the different blame, or it doesn't absolve you from having your sort of name stock decline, but it puts you in an elite status. It gives you a way for the faithful to look back fondly upon you for a very long time. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 years. It seems very uncertain these days, especially with the pandemic. But if he wins outright, that is something that Colby is going to be able to ride, I think, not merely for the next 4 years, BC, maybe the next 40. That is something he might be able to ride for as long as he has a professional and public life. Do you agree?
I do agree. He's got to be able to stay winning. He's got to be able to, I mean, there has to be a monster win, whether it's winning the welterweight championship or it's, again, getting him cooked up in some type of celebrity feud against a Conor type that he would end up winning to sort of keep his relevancy. Because look, at any shtick is great until you suffer losses, right? Then it doesn't work. But he would have the opportunity few have had to really ride, you know, the joining. I mean, it's almost like marrying Beyonce or something. If you know, it's that level of stardom and it just lifting you up. It would be fairly interesting. I mean, how close do you think he is to his leveling out ceiling of us finding out how great he can be? Can he win a welterweight championship, Luke?
I think he can. I don't know that he will, but you know, again, we go back to that fight with Usman. It was 1-3, 3-1, 2-2 heading into the 5th. I mean, that was basically anybody's fight, right? I mean, something like that. He had a real opportunity to take that from him. And Usman was the better guy that day, but I think if Colby had fought a little bit more, in a more of a diverse way, I honestly think he maybe could have beaten him. This is what makes the rematch so exciting. You saw Colby lose his shit when they were going back and forth at each other on that sort of split screen that they did after his last win over Woodley. And you could see that he was pissed and the fire was real. He was still on the adrenaline of having beat Woodley. I mean, Woodley is funny. We all thought that the Woodley versus Colby fight was the one to make. We were actually kind of concerned how the promotion might be, that these were the 2 rivals that would define this generation of welterweights. It turns out not really. Turns out it's going to be Usman probably and Colby. Maybe Gilbert Burns wins. I don't know. But it doesn't have the same kind of heat. But if
well, look, Usman needs him to a certain degree, right? Commercially, you need he'll be his Huckleberry. Imagine if they end up getting a title trilogy out of this. That could be fairly interesting.
Right. Like they have this like chapter of the welterweight division together. You can't talk about one without the other. And maybe Colby wins.
Jones in DC. I mean, look,
right.
Sonnen fought Silva twice and lost both, but he's still, that's what made him. So, look, Colby does have this potential, Luke, to go down like Chael Sonnen as one of the greatest salesmen. A guy who, look, you can't get to that level of salesmanship unless your ability is there. But a guy who was able to elevate his status so much higher than he would have with a different persona. There may be a Chael-like ending for him in that regard. And that's rare,
Let me pitch this to you, BC. Let's say Trump wins the election. And again, in a normal, reasonably non-controversial way. And Colby goes on to win a title. Can he naturally outgrow what he has with this sort of representative of Trump world? Can he be something more than that without ever actually like leaving it, but like maybe adding on to the identity? Can he do that?
Well, so the add-on would be a cleverly smart face turn. Because again, if Trump gets reelected a second time, there's a fairly loud majority saying that they're pro almost everything that the MAGA red hat brings to the table. So there is the idea if Colby can win the championship, bring it to the Oval Office and do that whole shtick, that he turns babyface out of that. and then, gets himself into a fight if it's possible with someone who other people don't like at all. And, look, it's happened. I even think Floyd Mayweather, who was sort of a purposeful villain most of his career in order to get you to pay to try to see him lose, there were times I thought he was attempting sort of heel turn, suddenly very humble and glowing with the media. I wonder if there's an angle there to get out of the idea of I'm just this top shelf agitator. Look, Stone Cold Steve Austin as a good guy was really a good guy doing bad things, right? Drinking beer, pouring it over. I mean, look, there's a way to pull this off. I don't know, though. I don't know how long Colby can win on this super elite level, though, and carry that shtick going. It's going to be fun to find out, though.
We didn't actually talk about it, but what if, going back to the original part of the conversation, what if Trump loses, but then Colby becomes champion? Is that the moment where he can say, okay, I rode this thing out as far as it's going to go, net, it was kind of a win. Now I'm a champion. I can use this as some kind of launch pad for a way to pivot or redefine. It seems like if anything is going to give you a new way to look at you, it's a UFC belt wrapped around your waist.
I got it. Instead of going MAGA, go. What's that guy's name? Ravsjan Kamanu. That guy.
Oh, Ramzan Kadyrov.
Become Ravsjan Kadyrov's caddy. That's the only way that Colby can take this villainous political gimmick and just rise it right back up to a whole new level, Luke. Okay, there it is right there. Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting to see.
That ends with a fight against Habib in Moscow. You know how that ends. That story. That's how that ends. That gimmick. Yeah.
By the way, do you think he actually has COVID or no?
Yeah, I don't know, Luke. I don't know what's real and what's not anymore, okay?
Are you in?
This is our time. The world's changed, and you are right in the center of it.
I don't know what's ahead, but all bets are off.